At the beginning of his reign, he was one of the most prominent figures in the American Mafia, maintaining a low profile in public but exerting more influence within the commission than well-known figures like Al Capone. He embodied the true essence of the Mafia: minimal publicity, maximum power. Taking over as the Mafia boss at the age of 26, he led his family consistently for over 30 years. His ability to elude authorities and live nearly to the age of 100 showcased his 3-decade-long dominance in the criminal underworld. Witnessing the rise and fall of the Mafia, he lived to tell the tale. This figure was Joseph Charles Bonanno. His story begins in Sicily, an island historically known for nurturing renegades, radicals, and gangsters. The rebellious spirit of the island, shaped by repeated foreign invasions and rule, gave rise to the Sicilian Mafia. It was in this world that Giuseppe Carlo Bonanno was born on January 18, 1905. His father, Salvatore Bonanno, was a wealthy mafia leader with extensive holdings in cultivation, vineyards, and livestock. Giuseppe's mother, Catherine, hailed from the Bonventre family, allies of the Bonanno clan. In 1908, Salvatore, facing legal troubles, took his wife and son to America, where they settled in Brooklyn, New York. Although they returned to Sicily in 1912 due to family conflicts, Joe Bonanno held on to the memories of his American childhood. Despite the disappointment of leaving what he held dear in America, Joe spent the rest of his formative years absorbing the rugged spirit of his homeland. At the age of 11, Joe's idyllic childhood was disrupted when his father was recruited to fight for Italy in World War I and returned home severely injured. His father's last words left a lasting impact. "Your name is Bonanno. Always take pride in your name." 5 years later, Joe became an orphan as his mother also passed away. As a teenager, he inherited his family's fortune and had to grow up quickly, navigating through family disputes over his father's inheritance. Disenchanted with his uncle's squabbles over the inheritance, Joe, at 17, decided to take matters into his own hands. He enrolled in a naval school in Palermo, distancing himself from his hometown. This marked the beginning of Joe Bonanno's journey, setting the stage for his future role in the American Mafia. In the bustling capital of Sicily, young Joseph Bonanno harbored a fervent desire to become a commander of men, aspiring to be a naval officer in the Italian merchant marine. Thanks to his parents' prosperity, he was spared from the need to work, providing him the time to fully dedicate himself to training at the Maritime Academy. However, his dreams were dashed with the rise of Mussolini in Rome in 1924. Mussolini's repression of Sicilians led to a crisis in Palermo, and Bonanno, in the romantic tradition of his forebears, was ready to fight. In response to Mussolini's regime, Bonanno formed a radical student organization denouncing the dictator. However, his stand against fascism cost him dearly. The Naval Academy suspended Bonanno, and he never graduated. As fascist police began torturing and killing Sicilians with mafia connections, Joseph made the difficult decision to return to the country he had once arrived in as a child, North America. In January 1925, Joseph Bonanno arrived in New York City, finding a metropolis immersed in the uncontrolled frenzy caused by the ill-conceived prohibition law. Settling in his uncle's home, who worked as a barber, Joseph embarked on learning the trade. However, cutting hair and touching people's heads didn't quite align with the skill set of the young Bonanno. Eager to prove his worth as a contrabandist, Joseph decided that being a gangster was much more exciting than being a barber. The landscape in New York City was ripe with opportunities for illicit activities, and Joe Bonanno, playing cops and robbers at night, engaging in deliveries and paying himself, found the world of contraband to be a thrilling adventure. Assisted by his surname, whose true value he began to realize, Bonanno quickly gained recognition among the natives of Castellamare. Despite his father having long passed away, many still wanted to show respect for the Bonanno name. With connections to Stefano Magaddino, a criminal boss from Italy leading the Buffalo crime family in western New York, Joseph's ties to the so-called royal lines of the Mafia further emphasized his belonging. Young Italians sought Joe's friendship to secure the backing of the Bonanno name. Joseph Bonanno didn't have to seek his way to the top. He found it himself through fellow Sicilians like Giovanni Romano and Gaspar di Gregorio, who saw value in having a man with that surname as a partner in their contraband operations. While not a venture producing thousands of dollars a day, it marked Joseph Bonanno's entry into something that could generate substantial income. The story of his early involvement in the world of organized crime was unfolding, laying the foundation for his future as a significant figure in the American Mafia. The profits were substantial enough for the young men who spared no expenses. They crafted alcohol in the basement of a house and then transported it through an underground tunnel to the adjacent garage. From there, the merchandise was loaded onto trucks and distributed to clandestine bars. Local police turned a blind eye to their operations, receiving regular payments, and major criminals had little interest in the small gains of these young bootleggers. The young contrabandists felt they had stumbled upon a fortunate path, envisioning that a few more years of this enterprise could lead to investments in legal businesses that would sustain them for the rest of their lives. However, as fate would have it, a tragic incident altered the course of Joseph Bonanno's life. During another routine whiskey-making session in Giovanni Romano's basement, an unnoticed alcohol leak ignited, causing an explosion that claimed Giovanni's life. Joe Bonanno, taking the event to heart, made a serious decision to abandon the world of bootlegging. This marked one of the strangest periods in Joseph Bonanno's life in the United States, especially considering his family's history deeply rooted in illegal activities on American soil. Following this, he worked as a driver and in his uncle's bakery, simultaneously attending acting classes. All these ventures proved successful for him. However, the prestige of his family name dissuaded him from pursuing a career as a driver or actor. Joseph settled in a Brooklyn neighborhood populated by immigrants from his hometown, including a revered figure from the old country, Salvatore Maranzano. This charismatic and elegant man, despite being a gangster, valued discipline and was an avid reader. Joe found himself elevated in Maranzano's presence, who recognized the young Bonanno's cunning and aptitude, eventually putting him in charge of his flourishing bootlegging operation. Under Maranzano's mentorship, Bonanno enthusiastically supervised distilleries, tackling any issues that arose. He faced competitors attempting to sabotage the business, thieves stealing trucks of goods, and the hustle and bustle of his work becoming notorious. Nevertheless, it was financially rewarding, and Bonanno accumulated enough wealth to open his own small distillery. On one occasion, when someone close attempted to encroach on his business, Joe wasted no time in setting things straight. After a confrontational showdown, he humiliated the assailant, leading to a summons from Maranzano and other local men of respect to account for his actions. What unfolded next triggered a series of events that would take decades to unravel. Reacting swiftly, Bonanno reached out to his elder cousin, Stefano Magaddino, who headed his own operations in Buffalo. Considering the gravity of the situation, Joe sought counsel and support from family connections as he embarked on a tumultuous journey that would eventually shape his destiny within the American Mafia. In 1930, a rekindled Sicilian feud erupted on the streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan, interrupting Joe Bonanno's courtship of his beloved Fela Bruzzo, a quiet seamstress with a sharp sense of humor. The violence escalated to a point where Joe, at the age of 25, bid farewell to his girlfriend, purchased a bulletproof Cadillac equipped with built-in machine guns, and prepared for war. The conflict provided Joe with an opportunity to showcase his capabilities in battle, transforming him into a seasoned gangster and earning him a significant place in the foundation of the modern American Mafia. Bonanno, along with his associates, found themselves pitted against the most powerful Italian gangster in New York, Joe the Boss Masseria. As bodies piled up across the city, gangsters experienced financial losses and diminishing patience. It was during these tumultuous times that Charles Lucky Luciano, a well-known figure and right-hand man to Masseria, entered the scene. Luciano orchestrated the murder of his own boss as a means to achieve peace with Salvatore Maranzano, an archenemy of Masseria. However, Luciano later betrayed Maranzano as well, ushering in a new era for the Italian-American Mafia. Following Maranzano's assassination, Bonanno chose not to seek vengeance for his boss's death. Instead, he opted to reconcile with Lucky Luciano. This decision led to a pivotal meeting in 1931, where Bonanno and Luciano agreed to peace. Joe was content with the arrangement, and this strategic move marked a significant turning point in his Mafia career. Under the emerging leadership of Lucky Luciano, the Mafia underwent a transformation, moving towards a more organized and cooperative structure. Despite the violent backdrop of the past, Bonanno's diplomatic approach and willingness to forge alliances contributed to the reshaping of the American Mafia. The once chaotic and deadly landscape gradually transitioned into an era of collaboration and strategic partnerships within the criminal underworld. Joe Bonanno's ability to adapt and navigate the complexities of organized crime during this pivotal period solidified his position as a key figure in the history of the American Mafia. His journey from a young bootlegger to a respected leader demonstrated not only his resilience, but also his strategic acumen in a world defined by power, loyalty, and survival. By this time, Joe Bonanno had solidified his position as the head of the Bonanno crime family within the newly established Mafia Commission. At the age of 26, Bonanno became one of the youngest bosses of a criminal family. Following the conclusion of the war, he married his beloved Fela Bruzzo, and a year later, the couple welcomed a son named Salvatore, honoring the baby's grandfather. In the mid-1930s, the paths of the two key figures of the Mafia Commission, Lucky Luciano and Joe Bonanno, diverged. Luciano gained nationwide recognition, becoming a well-known figure in the United States. In contrast, Bonanno remained largely unknown to the public. While Luciano courted trouble, enjoying the limelight by frequenting nightclubs and gracing the social columns of newspapers, Bonanno deliberately avoided media attention for decades. Throughout the 1930s, Bonanno concentrated on traditional mafia activities such as gambling, loan sharking, and other lucrative enterprises. Despite the inherent dark side of extortion and violence associated with these undertakings, Bonanno believed that instilling enough fear in his followers would render violence unnecessary. Bonanno's wealth from criminal enterprises allowed him to make shrewd real estate investments during the Great Depression. His legitimate business interests spanned diverse areas, including the garment industry, cheese factories, funeral homes, and a trucking company. It was rumored that one of Bonanno's funeral homes in Brooklyn served as a convenient location for disposing of bodies. The funeral home allegedly provided two-tiered coffins, enabling the burial of more than one body simultaneously. When Bonanno attained U.S. citizenship in 1945, he was already a multimillionaire. Not only did he rise through the ranks, but he also managed to maintain his faction within the criminal underworld and remain its boss even during turbulent times in the New York Mafia, which began in the late 1940s. The first indication of impending dark times emerged with a hidden conflict between Vincent Mangano, the boss of the Mangano crime family, and Albert Anastasia. This conflict ultimately led to Mangano's mysterious disappearance, and Anastasia assumed leadership. At that moment, Joe Bonanno held the most authoritative position as the president of the commission. Bonanno headed the conservative faction of the commission alongside Profaci and Magaddino. This period marked the zenith of his power, and Joe did everything in his capacity to cling to it. Although in hindsight, he describes the subsequent events as an attempt to maintain universal peace, there is a clear retrospective effort to portray his actions in a more diplomatic light. Refusing to relinquish the power that had fallen into his hands, Joe Bonanno found himself increasingly encroached upon by rival mob bosses. In a bid to strengthen his family's ties to the Mafia, he initiated his son Salvatore, now known as Bill Bonanno, into the secret society. At the age of 22, Bill was summoned to a gathering where lifelong associates recounted the history of the Mafia, urging him to swear allegiance. Bill, understanding the gravity, proclaimed his loyalty, embarking on a new phase of life where his commitment to the Mafia and his father would always take precedence. Following this initiation, Bill Bonanno fell in love with Rosalie Profaci, the niece of Joe Profaci, a crucial ally of Bonanno since the 1920s and a founding member of the Mafia Commission. In 1956, Bill and Rosalie celebrated a lavish wedding, marking the pinnacle of Joe Bonanno's prestige. The union united two of the most powerful mafia families in the United States. By August 1957, at 52 years old, Joe Bonanno was at the height of his power. He had recently presided over his son's wedding, successfully brokered peace between two mafia rivals in New York, and was planning a trip to Italy with other members of the Bonanno crime family. Unbeknownst to him, his fellow mafiosos were secretly delighted to see him depart, setting the stage for Joe Bonanno's unexpected downfall. In November of the same year, the unraveling of the Mafia Commission, which had maintained peace for so long, became apparent. Vito Genovese and Frank Costello were vying for control of the Luciano crime family, while the assassination of Albert Anastasia in October 1957 tested the authority of the commission. A national mafia meeting was called, where Carlo Gambino was installed as the new boss of the Anastasia family, among other pressing matters. During this meeting, mafiosos discovered the presence of law enforcement, prompting many to flee on foot or by car. Some escaped through the surrounding woods, but others were captured and compelled to testify. A total of 58 mafiosos were arrested by local police, leading to a wider public exposure of the mafia. Following this event, the Bonanno family's life became increasingly tense, under constant surveillance and legal pressure. In the early 1960s, it seemed that Bonanno's leadership position within the commission was in jeopardy. This set the stage for the most intriguing part of the story: how Joe Bonanno attempted to regain control of the commission. The generally accepted version suggests that Joe orchestrated a plan to assassinate Tommy, but the details of this endeavor remain a subject of intrigue and fascination in mafia history. Carlo Gambino and his cousin Stefano Magaddino allegedly planned this with Joe Mocco, who had recently assumed the position of boss in the Profaci crime family after the natural death of Joe Bonanno's great ally. Joe Mocco is said to have involved one of his top hitmen, Joseph Colombo, in the scheme. However, Colombo would later betray them and cooperate with authorities. Facing pressure from both the commission and the federal grand jury, Joe Bonanno found himself at a crossroads. The commission demanded explanations, leading to a tense situation. While Mocco presented himself before the commission, Bonanno, fearing a trap, refused to attend, denying the accusations and accusing his cousin Magaddino of fabricating the story to destroy him. Meanwhile, Joe Magliocco, who did appear before the commission due to his poor health, received a relatively lenient punishment of a $43,000 fine and an order to cede leadership of his family to Joseph Colombo in 1963. In 1964, the exposure of Bonanno escalated when a low-ranking member of the Genovese family, Joseph Valachi, broke the mafia's code of silence on national television. Despite his lower rank and limited contact with top mafia leaders, Valachi provided intricate details about the organization, its operations, unsolved murders, and the hierarchy of major crime families. By the fall of 1964, both the commission and the federal grand jury sought answers from Bonanno. Pressured by both the mafia and the law, Joe Bonanno found himself in a precarious situation. On October 20, 1964, the night before the scheduled grand jury hearing, Bonanno was kidnapped in front of his lawyer's apartment on Park Avenue. Initially presumed dead, speculation arose that Bonanno had orchestrated his own kidnapping to evade both the government and his vicious mafia enemies. 6 weeks later, Joe Bonanno re-emerged, contacting his son Bill from a payphone to inform him of his safety and hiding. During his absence, Joe asked Bill to take care of things in New York. This move stirred discontent among mafiosos who viewed Bill as a privileged and inexperienced individual. Despite the criticism, Bill assumed his role with determination, expressing his honor to stand in his father's shadow. Resistance to his leadership and unconventional lifestyle generated some rebellion within the Bonanno family. For the first time in decades, signs of dissent emerged within the Bonanno clan. Was Joe genuinely setting the stage for his son to become the boss? The growing tension within the family raised questions about the legacy of Joe Bonanno and the dynamics that would shape the future of the Bonanno crime family. As the turbulent events unfolded, the Bonanno family faced internal upheavals, external scrutiny, and a shifting power landscape within the American Mafia. During the tumultuous years of the Mafia's internal strife, Joe Bonanno found himself at the center of a power struggle that would reshape the landscape of organized crime. The discord within the family gave his bitter cousin, Stefano Magaddino, the opportunity he had been waiting for. Magaddino, the Buffalo crime boss, instigated and fueled a rebellion led by one of the family's high-ranking members, Gaspar Di Gregorio. Di Gregorio, who had been Joe's wedding godfather and the godfather to his son Bill, spearheaded the insurrection. The commission, now operating without Joe Bonanno, decided to support the revolt. In early 1966, Gaspar Di Gregorio, the leader of the rebellion, attempted to assassinate Bill Bonanno in a supposed peace meeting in Brooklyn. Miraculously, Bill managed to escape. That same year, after being in hiding for 2 years, Joe Bonanno returned, ready to fight and kill to save his beleaguered crime family. The insurrection had torn the Bonanno family apart, and the Mafia Commission was poised to take control. Despite his desire to retire, Joe would not allow the commission or any other entity to dictate his actions. The street war, known as the Banana War in the press, lasted for 2 years, with murders and retaliations on both sides. Joe established his base of operations in the Long Island home of his devoted son Bill, turning it into his war room and headquarters. In the spring of 1968, after 2 years of war and an assassination attempt on one of Bill's closest associates, Joe and Bill decided to retire to the West, away from the street war. Meanwhile, Stefano Magaddino suffered a heart attack and faced trust issues with his subordinates, losing power. Di Gregorio was shot and later suffered a heart attack. The commission, unhappy with Di Gregorio's efforts to quell the family rebellion, abandoned him and switched support to Paul Sciacca. Facing the ascendancy of the Mafia power led by Carlo Gambino, Joe Bonanno had no choice but to concede defeat. In 1968, Joe agreed to be banished from New York in exchange for no retaliation against any soldier of the Bonanno family. Though he hoped to live his last days in peace, the FBI attempted to pressure Joe for the next 10 years, using intimidating tactics, spies, and wiretaps. Despite his retirement, Joe felt persecuted and misunderstood in his old age. He cringed at every media reference to his name and lamented the loss of loyalty, restraint, and discipline in his world. In 1983, Joe announced something unprecedented for a Mafia boss. He would publish his memoirs. In his book, A Man of Honor, Joe portrayed himself as the last survivor of an extinct species and expressed his desire for peace. However, a young and aggressive prosecutor named Rudy Giuliani saw Joe's memoirs as ammunition in his crusade against the Mafia. Giuliani, now the U.S. attorney, despised Bonanno's self-indulgent image as an honor-bound godfather. Reading the memoir, Giuliani realized it could be evidence of the commission's existence and responsibility for decades of criminal activities. Joe tried to use a television appearance to show he wasn't the mysterious crime figure depicted by the media and law enforcement. Despite his efforts, Giuliani traveled to Arizona to interrogate Bonanno. Joe refused to speak, citing health concerns, but the judge rejected the medical excuse, declared him in contempt, and sent him to jail for a year and a half, his longest prison stay. However, Joe never betrayed his Mafia associates. After serving his time, he returned to his home in Arizona and lived peacefully among his children and grandchildren. Joe Bonanno outlived nearly all his friends and enemies, surviving numerous heart attacks and living until the age of 97. He passed away on May 11, 2002.